In very simple terms, the WMS is a nationwide web monitoring system, which means it's a system that technologically looks at your internet traffic, internet data, and the system has been deployed to monitor all internet traffic in Pakistan by using deep pocket analysis technology. Now, what this technology does is to allow the government to monitor, analyze, and block internet based activity. And if we go back and look at the pre qualification call that PTA had circulated at the time this technology was being acquired, they had said that the WMS is being deployed for identifying and blocking access to any online content that PTA considers to be unlawful under PICA, the cybercrime law. Later in consequent years, after the WMS was deployed, PTA has come back again and said that the main purpose is the curtailment of gray traffic. Now, gray traffic is something that you can understand by simply, it broadly refers to any internet traffic, any transaction over the internet that masks, let's say, incoming international telephone calls, any communications that are not terminated on the legal system, not terminated at the fixed mobile networks. And so when they're terminated illegally, they avoid taxes, they avoid levies, and they kind of cause damages to the national exchequer. Since the WMS was deployed, PTA claims that the gray traffic in Pakistan has been reduced by 92%. So it's a great claim, of course. But then the problem is that when you deploy technology like this, it doesn't simply have access to gray traffic, it has access to everything else that's there as well. So the problem is the lack of oversight, lack of transparency, and the lack of consideration of the far reaching impacts it can have on citizens' rights to information and right to privacy, etc. The lack of transparency and the opacity that surrounds the system is a huge issue. I think in March 2020 there was a cabinet committee meeting that was reported in the media, and Senator Mushtaq Ahmad Khan had raised concerns over potential privacy-based violations and impacts of this Sandvine technology, and he had also asked about the lack of a security audit before the system was put in place. And in that meeting, PTA chairman had said that these checks can only be done after the system has been put in place. But we have not heard back on whether these were done because the system has been in place for over a year now. Then obviously what happens is now PT has a technology that they might be using for good purposes as well, but the technology is very invasive in nature. It can be deployed for any number of purposes. We do not have a data protection law. We have not seen any indication that an independent security audit might have taken place. There are no procedures in place that allow independent access to this technology's implications. We cannot assess the possibility of abuse of power of this system. So obviously, with this opaqueness, with this kind of lack of access that allows independent assessments, and without anything detailed being submitted back to the parliament, the system remains dangerous to public privacy and rights. PTA is the competent authority to deploy the system, but PTA is not the authority, and PTA is not the body that should be held completely responsible for the acquisition of the system. The notification, the funds, the directive to deploy anything like that has to come from the government, right? First, we do have to think more deeply about how is it that PTA came to acquire the system. And it's very ironic that we saw a very visible incident of censorship through the system against Imran Khan because the system was acquired during the PTI government. It was acquired by the PTI government, and when it was being put in place, a lot of digital rights activists, a lot of civil society activists, journalists, they did indicate that this is a possibility on which the government was not, as usual, they were not willing to listen to. So, I think when we are talking about oversight, it's not just oversight over how the system is being deployed, but we also need, as civil society members and as journalists, we do need to dig a bit deeper into how the system came to be in place. We have to look at the policies that allowed it to happen, and we also need to look at the lack of security policies that are in place. Yes, judicial oversight is important, but I don't think that is the only kind of oversight that is needed. Sandvine, the company that is providing the WMS services to PTA, has been involved in monitoring of journalists and activists in countries like Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. So we are using that technology. We are using a corporation who developed a system that has been used to plant spyware and infect systems in other countries. So we need rigorous legislation, I feel, for creating a strong safety mechanism against abuse. So we need protective legislations that surround the deployment of this system as well. And also for technical oversight, we do need periodic independent forensic checks. Somebody who can actually technically look at what's happening and is allowed access into the system. They can sign NDAs. They obviously, we understand that this is crucial data, but without technical oversight, without technical forensics, we are relying on the same on data, on information coming in from the same authority that is whose oversight that's supposed to be. We need regular report back mechanisms to the parliament, right? And also we need a very public, a strong framework that the public can see, that activists and technologists and lawyers and legal fraternity, that they can analyze to see how exactly this surveillance system has been deployed, what are the points of intervention, etc. So if some violation happens, we at least have that, that framework to look back at. Okay, was this legal, was this illegal, what had happened? Right now we don't have a framework. We just know that this has been deployed, and we just know that PECA overall has been cited as the law under which the system was acquired. It needs to go back to the parliament. It starts with amendments in the Prevention of Cybercrime Act. The current government, PMLN, they did bring in the Cybercrime Act. They were short-sighted, I feel, and I think they should have learned by now what happened in the last few years against their activists as well using PECA. It should have demonstrated by now very well how the law can be misused. The approach that we need to take in any legislation is transparency, it's rights-based legislation. Unfortunately, when PECA was being drafted, a lot of thought, a lot of emphasis was being placed in trust, and we were told again and again to trust the government, that this abuse will not happen. Now, trust doesn't make a law strong. Legal mechanisms against oversight, consequences for abuse of power, unless they are built into the legal system, right? PICA doesn't have any, PICA is quiet on what happens if an abuse happens from within the system. So we need those chalked out. We need repercussions within the law. We need liabilities built in within the law that ensure that any abuse is heavily, it's curtailed right at the root of it. So PTA's contract, apparently with Sandvine, I think it was back in 2018, $18.5 million, a lot of money, and surprisingly given to a company with a very shady reputation. So there is a Canadian organization that looks at digital rights and uses technology to look at digital imprints and analyze if violations are being made. It's called Citizen Lab, and Citizen Lab had done a pretty detailed analysis on technologies that have been deployed by Sandvine. And their analysis found some very concerning factors, especially in Turkey and Syria. What they found was that this technology, so what happens with deep pocket analysis, just think of it as an additional middle box that is placed in the pathway of traffic that's going from your system to the internet, right? So through these middle boxes in Syria and Turkey, what they found was that hundreds of users were being redirected to a national spyware. So let's say you're trying to download a Windows application. I'm using Windows application because that's what the Citizen Lab found, that when users were trying to download Windows applications, instead of going there, they were being redirected to a spyware facility that was being run nationwide by the government. So they were redirecting to ensure that their the user systems got infected, and spying on them, surveillance on them was enabled. They also found evidence in Egypt, and I find this strange because at one hand we are looking at spying of journalists and God knows who else, but in Egypt, what they found was that the internet users who were using unencrypted web connections, like not using HTTPS, and are using HTTP, instead of reaching their destination, they were being redirected to revenue generating content, what we call clickbaits. So they were going to affiliate ads, they were going to browser cryptocurrency mining scripts. So basically they were being redirected to avenues on which their presence was making money for somebody else. So we see Sandvine being implicated into very different kind of violations, using my web presence illegally to get somebody else money through their affiliate ad content, through cryptocurrency mining scripts, etc., or the same script being used to infect users' computers with spyware, deepening the surveillance that was happening there. So yeah, these three countries were identified by Citizen Lab as countries where Sandman technology was being used to curtail human rights in different ways. And we have acquired the same technology without any security audit in place. So it's really concerning. All these technologies, all these measures that are used for that are being deployed for surveillance or systems of controls that are being built on cyberspace, they're there for long term. And any government that engages in the deployment of this kind of system, or that brings forth this kind of legislation, will in the end become the target of it. Nobody remains in power forever. So it's very short sighted to think that deploying something like this will help anybody control the cyberspace for a long time. Yes, you might be able to control it for a while, but then power shift, somebody else will be in power, and the same technologies will be used against you. So I will really request our lawmakers to not be short sighted. Think of this as a long term thing that doesn't only that obviously affects Pakistan and its citizens, but let's say if you don't care about that, even strategically for yourself, it's not a good idea to have these systems or these legislations in place.